Today we discuss the second of the two most important amendments in the Constitution, the Second Amendment, and our right to bear arms. My name is Sebastian Giraldo, and this is the Giraldo Show. Good afternoon, this is the Giraldo Show. I am your host, Sebastian Giraldo, and this is the conservative podcast, helping young conservatives out there to be brave and to spread their own opinion without fear of getting bullied by the leftist media. Now, we're going to jump kind of straight into the point of today's episode. Second Amendment, guns, right to bear arms, whatever you want to call it. It's a very important amendment in the Constitution. I would even dare to say it's probably the most important amendment in the Constitution, but we can get into that argument in a little bit. Now, as I did in the last episode with the First Amendment, I'm going to go ahead and read to you verbatim what the Second Amendment says in the Constitution. As on September 17th, 2019, it was Constitution Day. It was the anniversary of the signing and completion of the Constitution of the United States, probably one of the most important documents, if not the most important document of the United States, laying down the rules and laws of the land. So let me go ahead and read to you what the Second Amendment says. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, so let's go ahead and break this down, and we're going to go ahead and get into some statistics that prove why this constitutional amendment is very important to keep, and why people who want to try to ban assault rifles or assault weapons, why they probably are very wrong. But let's get into this first part. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Obviously, the government has to keep its people safe. They need to be able to make a military, make a navy, make anything necessary to protect the people of the nation. Police, army, Air Force, anything that would protect the citizens of the United States, government needs to be able to provide that. Second part, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Obviously, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. People have the right to own guns and keep those guns, and the government cannot infringe on that right. Pretty much, the Second Amendment, at the time it was pretty much written as a backup plan. Just in case government got a little bit too corrupt, the people could stand up for what they believe is right with their guns, and they could, quote or unquote, take over the government. A little bit anarchist, but the Founding Fathers thought if it ever gets to a point where it goes back to the times of us being under a monarchy, we need to be able to take our freedoms back. So that's pretty much why the Second Amendment was written at the beginning, but it kind of adopted to be able to say, hey, we have the right to protect ourselves and keep and bear arms against ourselves and against threats. So that's what the Second Amendment means to me, and it means to many conservatives out there, because I have no doubt that any conservative will go and tell you that it's very important to be able to keep guns or firearms or however you want to refer to them. Now, we're getting a lot of talk in recent media about gun control, about how we need to ban assault rifles. We got Beto O'Rourke talking about hell yeah, he's going to take your AR-15, and he has no shame of doing that. Even saying that the people of Texas, probably some of the most loyal gun-bearing citizens in the United States, saying that they told Beto that they're going to just give up the AR-15s, which I don't know how that's going to work. A quick little sidetrack. I did watch some of the Democratic debate. I can pretty much almost summarize what it was for every single candidate, so I'll go ahead and summarize it in a little bit. Bernie is Bernie, his Democratic socialist self. He's going to raise your taxes. He's going to make you pay for it, give you Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren, just a female Bernie Sanders. We used to be pretty moderate back in early 2000s, has now become somewhat of a radical. Beto O'Rourke, the punk high school kid, the cool kid, almost beat Ted Cruz in Texas. back in the election cycle. He wants to take your AR-15s, thinks America was founded in the 1600s when the first African slave came over. We got Pete Buttigieg, who's just becoming more radical by the second. He used to be such a moderate guy, and then he realized that if he wanted to kind of get into this race, he had to start going more towards the left, and that's kind of where he's going. Joe Biden, in my opinion, he's probably the safest guy, just because he looks old. I mean, he's almost in his 80s. I mean, come on. He's a grandpa. He's the most moderate out of all of them, I would say. And honestly, he's probably the most likely to beat Donald Trump in the general election. I'm not saying that he will, but he's more likely just because more independent candidates, more independent people who kind of lean on both sides, but they don't know, they might lean more towards the Joe Biden side instead of the Bernie Sanders or the Elizabeth Warrens. If you want my opinion on it, I think Elizabeth Warren will eventually take the nomination. I think even though she didn't have the best debate night, I think she still will rise over Bernie and Biden just slightly to get the nomination. So, and then on Biden. Julian Castro, I don't really have much of an opinion on him. All I know is that he didn't do very well in the debate. Andrew Yang, hashtag gang, as a lot of people are saying. I have a good bit of respect for him because he is one of the only Democratic candidates to go on the Ben Shapiro show to express his differing opinion. So Ben Shapiro loves him. I think he's a great guy. He wants to give $1,000 to like 10 families. I'll happily take those $1,000. I mean, who doesn't like free money? I'm guessing he's going to pay for it. I hope I don't have to pay for it, especially. Let's see. We got Andrew Yang, Amy Klobuchar, who I think was in the debate. I have no real opinion on her. Kamala Harris, the narc. I mean, come on. Like, a bit cringe. Kind of really dropping in the polls. Laughed when an anti-Trump supporter called the Trump supporters and Trump retarded and then claimed she didn't hear it. Cory Booker, the vegan. I don't really have much to say about him. He's kind of radical. He is dating Rosario Dawson, though, so big props to him. And I think that was it. I think that was everyone in the Democratic primary debates a couple of nights ago. And those are just kind of my opinions on them. Again, I think Elizabeth Warren will eventually take the nomination, which should be a good sign for Trump fans out there. If anyone other than Biden gets a nomination, I have a certainty that Trump is going to win re-election. Biden, it's kind of in the middle. I still think Trump will get re-election as long as the economy stays as good as it's been. Probably one of the best economies that we've ever had, at least in the past 30 years. I mean, the economy is booming right now. Unemployment rate is at record lows, especially Black and Hispanic unemployment rate, record lows. Wages are increasing. Jobs are being created. It's a great economy. It's a great time to live. We should just support Donald Trump instead of doing what a lot of people on the left do and just continuing to complain and criticize him even when he tries to be nice to the people of the Bahamas, for example. I saw a couple of comments on his Instagram and Twitter. He was trying to pray for the people of the Bahamas, which is a good gesture. I mean, obviously, the president should be able to unite his people in order to help the Bahamas in what was Hurricane Dorian. But then I saw a lot of comments saying you don't really care for those people. You just want the press to be on your good side. And I just thought that's a bit disrespectful. I mean, I think he's being genuine, President Trump. So there's no real need to attack him about this. But whatever, it's their prerogative. They can do whatever they want. They're just jealous that Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton back in 2016. So we got off on a bit of a tangent there, but let's get back into the meat of today's subject, which is the Second Amendment, and especially guns. You hear a lot in the media about how we've had a lot of mass shootings, a lot of gun deaths, which are true. We have had a lot of tragic, horrific shootings. El Paso, Parkland, just to name a couple. But the media is really pushing the agenda that the problem is legal gun ownership and taking away those legal gun owners' rights to bear arms. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go through a couple of statistics. And I'm going to link all the statistics in the description of the podcast so you could go and read for yourself what I'm talking about. See for yourself what's really happening. Okay, so statistic number 1. Every year, guns are used over 80 times more often to protect a life than to take one. So, in 2017, which is I think these are the most recent statistics, are the ones in 2017. In 2017, there were about a little bit over 2.5 million cases of Americans using their guns for self-defense. So that's great. I mean, that's a huge number. These are legal, law-abiding citizens who are using their Second Amendment rights for what they're meant to be, for protecting themselves, protecting their homes, protecting their families. 31,672 incidents. And more specifically, in 2017, 39,773 incidents of guns were homicide, accident, and suicide. So it's a pretty small percentage of people who have guns who are actually going out and killing people. Let me go ahead and pull out the real math. It's about 1.5% of all gun incidences in the United States being homicides, accidents, and suicides. And I'm going to go ahead and go into more of that number in a little bit. But let's go ahead and continue on with the statistics. So there are approximately 270 million civilian firearms in America. So there are less firearms in America than there are citizens or people of population. Which I've heard a lot of people say that there are more guns in America. There might be more guns produced, but the fact is there are less guns that Americans own than there are people. Okay, 200,000 times a year, a woman use a gun to defend against sexual abuse. That's a pretty big number. 200,000. That's 20% of a million. Doing the quick math there. That's a lot of sexual abuse. And I think the statistic mentions that it's sexual abuse and rape. I don't necessarily remember, but the statistics will all be in the description. You can go ahead and read for yourself. 3 out of 5 polled felons say they won't mess with an armed victim, meaning the other 2 out of 5 will not be polled because they will be shot by people who own firearms. So, again, less crimes if there are more legal gun owners. If you take away those guns, those 200,000 times a year that women use to defend against sexual abuse and using a gun, they won't have that because you want to ban them. Okay. Gun ownership versus crime. Now, there's a lot of stories out there that high gun ownership equals high amounts of crime. But let's break that down a little bit more. Okay, so the U.S. ranks number 1 in the world for highest gun ownership rate per 100 citizens. It's about 89 guns per 100 residents. The second place country is Yemen with about 55 guns per 100 residents. So you think, wow, that's a very big gap. You must think that the United States must have a really high amount of crimes, and specifically homicides, because that's what most crimes used by guns are with. It's homicides, intentional homicides. However, if you look at the highest intentional homicide rate per 100,000 residents, number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are not the United States, which is good. I mean, it would be pretty bad if the United States were among the highest intentional homicide rates. Number 1 is Honduras with 91.6 intentional homicides per 100,000 residents, around 92. I'm going to go ahead and round up or down, depending. Around 69, a little bit over 69 intentional homicides in El Salvador, number 2. Cote d'Ivoire, number 3, the Ivory Coast, a little bit under 57 intentional homicides per 100,000 residents. Number 4 is Jamaica with 52.2 intentional homicides per 100,000 residents. So, you're wondering, where's the United States? Well, the United States is all the way down at 4.8, almost 5, intentional homicides per 100,000 residents. That ranks 103rd in the entire world. So there's an obvious correlation there. It's a negative correlation. More guns, more legal guns wielded by legal citizens of the United States, and there are fewer crimes. In countries such as Honduras and El Salvador, there's some of the strictest gun control laws out there, and yet they're still number one and number two on intentional homicides per 100,000 residents. So that should show you that the United States, more illegal guns equals less homicides and less crimes overall. The 9 European nations with the lowest gun ownership rate have a combined murder rate 3 times of that of the 9 European nations with the highest gun ownership rate. Now that's insane. You would think that less guns means less murder. More control of guns equals less murder. Obviously not. Because when you're preventing legal gun owners from accessing firearms, you're preventing crimes from being stopped. Well, just think about it. Because what the left wants to do, they want to ban AR-15s. They want to ban assault rifles, assault weapons. Entirely. They don't want criminals can't get guns. They're not prohibited. They are prohibited, I should say. I'm sorry. They're prohibited from attaining weapons in the first place. So any statistic that includes gang and drug-related crimes, which I read in the statistic was about 80% of all gun-related homicides were of drug and gang-related. So those are people who are not legally able to carry a firearm with them. But when you put a ban on assault rifles, that prevents a lot of legal citizens, legal and law-abiding citizens, from accessing guns that can potentially save their life, save their family, well, the life of a loved one. That's insane what the left is trying to do. Trying to ban guns from law-abiding citizens. I mean, the statistics are out there. It shows that more legal gun ownership equals less crime, less homicides, but I guess they don't want to see that. They just look at all the mass shootings, which are horrible cases of mass shootings. But we're actually going to go ahead and get into the statistic. We're going to break down the 39,773 homicides, accidents, and suicides statistics of gun deaths that were of 2017, so 2 years ago. But before that, go into a couple more statistics. So United Kingdom, which is considered by many to be the most violent country in the European Union. Well, if Brexit ever ends up working out for them, they won't be in the European Union anymore. But in the United Kingdom, it's illegal to possess handguns. Which, first of all, I mean, obviously, no protection against burglars, against rapists, sexual assaulters, murderers, serial killers, whatever you want. So, no way to protect themselves with guns. Per 100,000 people in the UK, there are a little bit over 2,000 violent crimes committed. Specifically, 2,034 violent crimes committed per 100,000 people in the UK. Compared to the United States, where it's 466 violent crimes committed per 100,000 people in the United States. So, you've got 23% of what is committed in the UK of violent crimes is being committed in the United States. And in the UK, it's illegal to possess a handgun. They have strict gun control laws, and there are more violent crimes in the UK than in the United States, which has very, I wouldn't say lenient gun laws, but there's no necessarily gun control. People are allowed to possess firearms. In the decade following the Labour Party's election and banning of handguns in 1997, so this is about 22 years at this point, 20 years probably based on the study, the number of violent crimes attacked soared by 77% to 1.2 million in 2007. So 20 years later, violent attacks through the roof. 77%, 1.2 million, a little bit over 2 attacks every minute. So you might be thinking, how are people committing crimes if they're not able to wield guns? Kitchen knives. Half of all stabbings in the United Kingdom are committed by kitchen knives. So it's prompted a group of doctors to call for a ban on long pointed kitchen knives. Now, you don't have to really know much about gun control to hear that and think that's ridiculous, banning kitchen knives. But it's the same argument. Because one thing is committing a certain amount of the crime, it needs to be banned. Okay. Concealed carry in America. An analysis of the FBI crime statistics found that states that adopted concealed carry laws reduced murders by 8.5%, rapes by 5%, aggravated assaults by 7%, and robberies by 3%. That's great. Concealed carry, big supporter. Make sure you protect yourself out there. A pretty significant amount of drops in murders, rapes, aggravated assaults, and robberies. Now, there has been one exception. Every public mass shooting in the United States since 1950 has taken place where citizens are banned from carrying guns. So, in other words, the places that mass shootings are being committed in, they're in gun-free zones where citizens are not allowed to have their guns. Imagine if they were committed in gun legal zones. I don't think we'd be hearing about this many mass shootings. But mass shooters specifically target gun-free zones because they know that even if police are there, it's going to take a while. That's pretty much what mass shooters target. And that's why gun-free zones are not really a good idea. Okay. I know there's a lot of statistics here. We're almost at the end of the episode, so just make sure you stay in here, especially if you support gun ownership. I know it's kind of a heavy topic, but it's something that it's very important to me. Even though I don't own a gun, I haven't really shot that many guns, but I see the high importance of legal gun ownership. Okay. This is a statistic comparing the police to an armed citizen. So, from the police, there are a little bit under 800,000 total police officers. They have an 11% error rate. The average deaths of a shooting rampage stalked by police is around 14.3. And they kill around 606 criminals each year. Now, that's pretty good. I mean, they're criminals. They're not abiding by the law. So, anything that happens to them happens to them. Now, let's go to an armed citizen. There are 80 million gun-owning citizens. Big leap. There's a 2% error rate. Average deaths of a shooting rampage stopped by a citizen is 2.3. Again, that statistic is most likely skewed by gun-free zones that don't allow citizens to have their guns with them. We see, for example, there is an example in Walmart of a shooter walks into Walmart, a guy pulls out his handgun, shoots the shooter down before he can start killing anyone. However, each year, armed citizens killed 1,527 criminals, or over twice what the police were able to kill. The police are the people that are supposed to be wielding the guns. They're the ones that have the training. Yet armed citizens, legal citizens, are the ones that are helping take criminals off the streets permanently. So we'll get a quick example close to home. Kennesaw, Georgia, 1982. We'll set the scene. It's 1982 in Kennesaw, Georgia. Kennesaw passed a law requires heads of households to keep at least one firearm in the house. The residential burglary rate subsequently dropped 89%. Almost 9/10 of all, almost 9 pretty much 9 out of 10 burglaries were just disappeared. That's not really the best example. 90% burglary rate dropped in Kennesaw, compared to just 10.4% of a drop in Georgia as a whole. So again, more legal guns lead to less crimes being committed. Today, the violent crime rate in Kennesaw is still 85% lower than Georgia's or the national average. And that's huge. Again, I can't stress it enough. More legal gun owners lead to less crimes. Any statistics that attempt to correlate more guns equal more crime most likely contain that statistic that I mentioned earlier, that 80% of all gun-related homicides were drug or gang-related. People who have guns illegally. That doesn't include legal citizens having guns. Okay, final statistic before we end the episode for today. I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that a little bit under 40,000 total gun deaths in the United States back in 2017, specifically 39,773 gun homicides, accidents, or suicides. That's a lot. It sounds like a lot. It is up in the percentages from 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But let's break down that statistic a little bit more. So in 2017, 39,773 people died from gun-related injuries in the United States. 60% of those gun deaths were suicides. Let me say that again. 60% of all gun deaths were suicides. So not people trying to kill other people. They are people who have a mental problem that need to be helped. And they're unfortunately killing themselves. But that's 6 in 10 U.S. gun deaths in 2017 were suicides. 37% were murders, and 3% were the accidents, anything that isn't considered an intentional murder or a suicide. Okay. So, if we take out suicides and accidents from gun deaths, we get left with a little bit under 11,000 U.S. gun murders and non-negligent manslaughters for which data is available, according to the FBI. In 2017, of those 10,982 murders, 64% were not with assault rifles, but they were with handguns. 64%. If we do the math very quickly, that comes out to approximately a little bit over 7,000 total gun murders were used by handguns. But you're not seeing that agenda being pushed by the left. No, they want assault weapons. And assault weapons were involved in only 4% of those murders. So if we go ahead and do the math on that, 439.28 murders are committed by assault weapons, or assault rifles, whatever you want to call it. That's a pretty big drop. That's a drop in the bucket of the 10,982, or of the over 7,000 handgun murders. So why isn't the left trying to push for a handgun ban, or just a ban on all weapons? Well, let's not just keep handguns out of it, because handguns obviously are too dangerous because they commit the majority of the murders. Assault weapons, they fire multiple rounds per second, that's what they say. We should ban those as well. Shotguns, they're big and dangerous. They look dangerous. You see how ridiculous it is? Banning assault weapons will just slightly improve the gun murder rate, because the majority of murders are committed by handguns. Again, people who most likely were not supposed to have handguns in the first place. People who are illegally wielding them. And how do we stop that? More legal gun ownership. I can't stress it enough. Legal gun ownership leads to lesser crimes. There's no doubt about it. If we got rid of all gun-free zones, maybe not all of them, but if we start to limit the amount of gun-free zones in the country, I think there might be a lot less stories of shooter kills 30 people at a concert, and more stories of hero kills mass shooter with his handgun. I think that's very important. So, thank you for tuning in to today's episode about the Second Amendment. This is the Giraldo Show. If you enjoyed the episode, please give me a follow, give it a like, leave a comment. I do want to give a shout out to my second follower, Pen Rose, for being a supporter of the channel. I really appreciate it. We're at 16 downloads at the time of recording this episode. I really appreciate you supporting my journey as a conservative podcaster. Thank you very much for tuning in. My name is Sebastian Giraldo, and this is The Giraldo Show.